Hi there, welcome to The Sacred Journey. The Sacred Journey is the program that reminds you that life is a wonderful adventure. Each and every experience we have is a unique and perfect opportunity for learning. I'm Joyce St, and tonight's program is beyond opportunities for learning. I wanted to do this show and I didn't have the opportunity to wait until I got back into the studio at Nutmeg TV. There are some very, very serious things that need our attention, and I have Rochelle Ripley with me. You know Rochelle. She's a dear friend of mine. She's a CNN top 10 hero. She is one of the most aware people that I know. She's not an alarmist. When she states facts, they're facts. She's done her research. I sometimes get a little emotional about things and respond sometimes without checking things out. That's not the case, and Rochelle has some critical things to share with you. So Rochelle, thank you for going out of your way to meet me here at my house. Whatever is going on right now is horrendous.
Agreed.
Where do we begin? You've just been back from Standing Rock.
Correct.
Start from wherever you think we need to begin.
So I want to begin with Native American treaties, because I think too often in this country our education system does not give our young people and our adults an opportunity to really understand what Indian country is about. So if we go back, and I'm not going to go back ancient history, but if we go back to the origins of the coming of the Europeans to what we call Turtle Island, now America, and look at what the consequences are of that, as we call it, invasion. So when we look at that and we look at the unequalness of the struggle that went on in the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s, what we see is the indigenous people, the first Americans, the First Nations of this both North and South American continent, looking at a force that was determined to take everything away from them. As that struggle progressed, and in between we had the Civil War, which kind of directed people away from Indian country, at least Western Indian country. Eventually the United States wanted to get treaties with the native nations that were left, that were totally decimated. A treaty is a legal document. It's the same as when you bought your house or you bought your car and you signed a contract. You can't just say, "Ooh, oops, now I don't want that part in the contract anymore. We're going to take your car back. We're going to take your house back because, we just want to do that even though the contract says it's yours." So in those treaties, and in the case of the Lakota Sioux people, it was the Fort Laramie treaties of 1851 and 1875. In those treaties, what was designated is the land the government was not going to take away. So it isn't that the government gave us anything, because it was all our land to begin with. Everyone in this country lives on native land, originally native land, but it was what they weren't going to take away. Well, we'll let you have this part, we won't take that away. It is the same as if the United States government had a treaty with Japan. We are considered a sovereign nation by law. All of the native tribes that have treaties are sovereign nations. But we're unique in the world in that we are a sovereign nation within a sovereign nation, and that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. So when we look at native treaties and we look at what their land holdings are under those treaties, we look at Standing Rock, Cheyenne River, which are sister reservations that abut each other. They share a common boundary, and they share the Missouri River as their water source.
And now, does a treaty expire?
No, not unless the land is ceded back from the tribe. They say, well, willingly in quotes, because it isn't ever willingly, or the government unilaterally, which is what traditionally has happened in this country, is the U.S. government has just taken the land back. So, people grew up watching Yosemite Sam and hearing there are gold in them there hills. Well, them there hills were the Black Hills of South Dakota, which were ours by treaty. But when gold was discovered, the U.S. government took them back. So we never ceded it, but it was taken back from us, okay?
Understood.
If you look at Standing Rock today, which is the epicenter of the struggle for the Dakota Access Pipeline stopping, it is land that was never ceded nor taken back by the U.S. government.
So it is native land.
It is native land. Legally, it is native land. There's a part that's the Standing Rock Reservation and a part that is the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation, but the actual land on which we call it DAPL, Dakota Access Pipeline, DAPL is trying to build this pipeline, is land that they purchased from a non-native who somewhere along the line purchased that land, whether it was legal or not. So our people are up there, and there are thousands up there from Cheyenne River as well as Standing Rock. When our people are confronted there, they're being arrested for trespassing on their own land. And
Mind-boggling.
it's mind-boggling. It is really mind-boggling. So I went up a week and a half ago, and when I got there, I went up with one of our retired military vets, who is you know him, Robert,
Yes.
who is in charge of security for the section of the camp that is the Cheyenne River section. And we went up, my brother and I went up with him, and we spent a whole day up there with him, and he took us around, and he'd say, well, here's where the Rosebud section is, here's where this section is. The day we went,
Rosebud being another
Lakota reservation. The day we went was a day that 550 clergy from all over the country came up to support the pipeline. One of the clergy in...
Support putting the pipeline
No,
through or
blocking,
stopping?
sorry, that's
Okay.
right, blocking the pipe in support of the tribes.
Right.
So one of the clergy who coordinated it was Margaret, who is a priest at the Episcopal Church in Cheyenne River in Eagle Butte, our tribal headquarters. And she told me that when it started out, she got about 229 clergy saying they were coming. By the next day, it was up to 330, and then she had to leave to go up to the camp to support and get things ready. And that day, 550 clergy from all over the country showed up to say, stop.
It's pretty revealing.
It's very revealing, and it included every denomination of Christianity. It included Jewish rabbis, it included Muslim imams and other Muslim leaders, and a Druid. So we were pretty well covered, and of course the native spirituality, which is always there. 14 of those clergy people, without saying anything to any of the native people because they didn't want it rebounding back on the tribes, actually went to the governor's mansion and chained themselves to the mansion in protest and were arrested for doing that. We were so inspired by the fact that so many came and so many worked so hard, and they are taking it back to their congregations clear across the country. So the idea is to get the word out at this point, because we're fighting this immense struggle against a multinational mega corporation who is determined to put this through.
The sad part about this is we just had an election, and there were so many people who were uninformed, misinformed, or underinformed. And when I talked about the introduction of my show, opportunities for learning, it inconceivable to me that people voted for a candidate who stated on record 2 pipelines, Keystone and Dakota, going through.
Correct. As well as talking that he is in favor of and working toward fracking in the national parks. So let's talk about fracking for a minute, because that's what we're talking about with the Dakota Access Pipeline. It is fracked oil. So fracking oil has major implications. It has immediate implications for the area in which it is being fracked. It requires an immense amount of fresh water to be filtered through with chemicals, rendering it unusable after it has been through the fracking process. Fracking oil is viscous. It is one of the dirtiest products that we can have, especially among petroleum products, and it requires incredible amounts of piping.
And this is all during a drought.
This is during a drought. It's always a drought out in the Dakotas, to say the least. I think one of the things that's important for people to understand, and I was kind of shocked when I heard this. I heard it a couple of years ago, and I had to do my research because I found it hard to believe. But from the origins of the Earth, geologically, all the water that exists on Earth today is what existed at its origins and will exist 2 million years from now. You cannot create new water. You can destroy water and make it unusable, but what that does is it just takes it out of the reserves. There isn't going to be any more water than what we have on Earth today. So every time we take water out and we make it unusable and we have to pack it up and send it someplace to get rid of it, we have lost that forever from the world's water sources. It's a really important factor. It's not just that they're using water, it's that they're deleting it from the world's water reserves.
Not to be replaced.
Correct, correct. So, and then of course, so much of the water of the world is salted from ocean water, which can be desalinated, but it's not quite the same, and it's an expensive process. So fracking oil, once we get it up, part of the process is to crack the seams of the earth where this fracked oil is. It's way down deep underneath, and it's not accessible the way the old-fashioned kind of drill well and up comes spurting the oil. So it takes a lot of money and cost, and it runs the cost of that oil up higher. One of the things that's happening to fracking oil, it's becoming less valuable to frack because it's so expensive to produce it that, and with the prices of oil down across the United States now, it's going to reach a point where it's no longer viable to use fracked oil because they're not going to make a profit off it, they'll have a loss.
And knowing that the earth is a living thing, the harm that it's doing, irreparable harm that it's doing, nobody thinks about it. When you've got dollar signs in your eyes and greed in your heart, it's no consideration at all for the well-being of the earth.
When you crack the surface of the earth, and I'm not talking about the ground surface but down below, you make the earth's crust unstable. And what's happening is Oklahoma is one of the biggest places, as well as Pennsylvania, where they have had an inordinate increase in the number of earthquakes. On average, Oklahoma used to have 1 earthquake a year, and it was always pretty minor, 2 to 3. They are now having hundreds and hundreds of earthquakes. They have now become the #1 state in the United States for earthquakes. Think about that. That includes Hawaii, which is a volcanic state. It includes Alaska, who has hundreds a day. But Oklahoma, because of fracking, is now the #1 state in the country.
And they're not on a
Earthquakes.
scale of 2 or 3 or 1 like they used to
Oh,
be.
no. They're
major.
having dozens a day, sometimes hundreds a day. And while they may be in the lower range right now, they just had a 5.5 earthquake the other day. So it's damaging to the earth in the processing of it, it's polluting of the earth in the use of it. And then these pipelines go in, and when the pipelines go in, we're always told, oh, this is perfectly safe, nothing could happen here. And that is absolutely untrue. I mean, if you read alternative news, and I'm not talking about whack job news, I'm talking about something other than the corporate-owned news media, which is what most of our media is now. You will be reading about these things that are happening, pipeline splits that are everywhere, pollution that happens. When the Keystone was going to go through, and President Obama stopped that, but it was an executive order, so it can still be reversed, and Mr. Trump has said he will reverse that. There was an alliance that had never been heard of before. It was called the Cowboy and Indian Alliance, and it was the cowboy, i.e. the ranchers in Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska, as well as the native tribes, who paired up together to fight against the Keystone. And one of the things that the ranchers were saying was that they were being given a document to sign. And they were told, just sign this document, because we'll pay you for the use of your land. If you don't sign it, we're going to take it by eminent domain. So that brings us to another area that most people don't understand. Unfortunately, in our country, people have become not everyone, but too many, have become superficial, and they watch the entertainment news, but they don't watch the real news, and they don't take the time to research. So what happened with the ranchers is they started reading these contracts, and they were saying, well, what do you mean you can take this by eminent domain? So what is eminent domain? If you read the Constitution, in there it says that the government may take land or property by eminent domain, by right of government, in order for it to serve the greater purpose of all people.
Excuse me, where does the greater good come in as far as the natural world? When did that become
Well, I mean,
not a consideration anymore?
Well, it's more than that, because the only right of eminent domain went to the government, not to private corporations. And sadly, the test case on this that caused it to open up to corporations was here in Connecticut.
Really?
It was down on the shoreline in New London, Norwich area, where a corporation wanted to come in, a major building corporation. They wanted to raise people's houses to build a big condo unit.
I remember that now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the people said, oh, no, this is my house, you're not taking it by
And it's been in the family for generations.
Exactly, and this is my home. And the corporations took it to court, and they took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yes, corporations, just like they ruled corporations are people. I don't plan on marrying one anytime soon, but they're people. Does that mean that we can put corporations in jail?
Interesting thought.
Interesting thought. But just as they ruled that in Citizens United, they ruled that corporations could take eminent domain. So we go back to the ranchers in Iowa and Nebraska, and they said, well, we can take it anyway by eminent domain. So either sign it and get some money, or we'll take it by eminent domain and give you some pittance of money. But when they started to read the contracts, what the contracts said were, we're going to put our pipe through your ranch. If it splits, if it breaks, if it leaks, if it spills, you're going to have to go to court and prove that you didn't do something as the owner of that land to cause that to happen. So imagine you have a beautiful home here with beautiful land surrounded. They put a pipeline through and it leaks. How are you going to have the money to hire attorneys to go up in court against a multi-million-dollar, multi-billion-dollar corporation that has 300? It can't happen.
And they knew it.
So that's part of what offset the Keystone pipeline, is that there was no way that the ranchers were able to sign that and be responsible for that. But it's a way of putting people out of business. So now the ranch is up for business, now they own it all. So those are just some of the immediate problems that occur with fracked oil and with pipeline.
And so greater good does not include spiritual good.
No, it means the greater good of the corporation is what it means.
The dollar sign good.
The dollar sign good. Now understand that when the DAPL was first proposed, and I will refer to it as DAPL because it's a whole lot easier than saying the whole thing. When DAPL was proposed, it was going to go through the city of Bismarck, North Dakota. And the non-Indian community there said, oh, hey, wait a minute, that's going to pollute our water. You can't put that through here. So they moved it to Standing Rock Indian Reservation. So if it applied to Bismarck, why doesn't it apply to Standing Rock? When you look at Standing Rock, you not only have all the same issues that Bismarck had, but you also have the fact that by federal law, the tribes have to be consulted and consent to have their land used that way, and that has never happened. That is part of the reason why the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has now withheld permission for DAPL to go forward. Now, DAPL no longer has permission to continue drilling and doing all the things they've been doing.
Doesn't mean they're not doing it.
But they are
They
doing
just
it.
lost permission to.
That's correct, because there's nobody there enforcing it. So because of that, they are very nearly done with the pumping station on the Missouri, which is then going to go between 90 and 125 feet below the surface of the water to connect to the other side where most of that pipeline is already in place. Yeah.
Sometimes I'm just speechless over this, sometimes I'm enraged over this, sometimes I'm devastated over this.
Yeah.
Now, we're probably going to be doing 2 shows, and I want to let our viewers know, we're just scratching the surface now. We're going to do a follow-up show, a continuation, so please find out how to see the next part of the show. It may go on and on and on, I don't know, we've got plenty of time. Rochelle will be sharing things you can do, people you can contact, places you can go for accurate information. So when we're done this particular episode, please go nowhere, because find out, we're continuing, find out how to find out more.
Right,
Okay,
exactly.
find out where part 2 will be of this, so.
Yeah, so you have been out to the reservation, Cheyenne River Reservation, with me multiple times doing the amazing work that you do. And so I want to talk a little bit about the personal side of it, because you know many of the people I'm about to speak about. The vast majority of people at we call it the Osheti Shakawan camp, which means the 7 original council fires of the Lakota Nation. And so at Osheti, there's 3 actual camps. There's a Rosebud one, there's the Osheti, which is the big one, and then there's the Stone Camp, which was the original one, which started by 3 people from Cheyenne River who literally pitched tents along the river and said, we're not moving. And that one is still there as well. That's more on the front line, because closest to the drilling. So the people who started to go up there were the ones that started to then draw attention to it. Everybody was kind of half asleep and didn't realize that it was moving down there and that it was moving as quickly as it was going. Actually today, as we're speaking on The View, Whoopi today on The View finally covered the DAPL issue.
Oh, really?
And she said something we've all been saying. Part of the problem is that, I mean, in the ideal world, we won't have the pipeline because of the environmental effects. But if there's going to be a pipeline, it can't go through our sacred grounds. So on these lands, we have our burial grounds, we have artifacts that go back generations after generation. And what she said I thought was crystal clear. She said, imagine that you're going to visit your parents or grandparents buried at a cemetery. And all of a sudden this pipeline company comes and they said, too bad, we're just gonna dig up your relatives because we need to make money by going through this cemetery. That's what's happening. And they have uncovered human remains, they have uncovered religious artifacts, and they don't care. And when I say they don't care, it's not an opinion, it's a fact. The reason I can tell you it's a fact, the tribes went to Washington with a federal judge to ask for an injunction. They received a temporary injunction, and in that process the federal judge said, I know you claim there's burial grounds and artifacts. Would you do me a favor, please? Well, it wasn't so much a favor as an order. And have your archaeologist draw a map of those sacred areas. In the meantime, Dapple and everybody else, everybody's got to stop. So there was no drilling going on, no bulldozing going on at that particular moment. And on that Saturday morning, people woke up in the camp. And keep in mind that this camp is mostly tents and teepees. And every day, continuously, helicopters from Dapple and their private security and airplanes from Dapple are going over 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they buzz the camp, and they photograph the camp, and they have drones taking pictures. So there's really no quiet time where you can just go to sleep and relax. They woke up on a Saturday morning about a month and a half, 8 weeks ago, and they heard the machines start up, and they thought, well, what's going on? Because they're not allowed to be doing anything now. And so they went running from camp to find it, and all the machinery had been moved off of the designated pipeline digging area directly on the areas identified by the tribal archaeologist as the cemeteries. They went out of their way to go off of an area where they weren't even going to be putting a pipeline in and dug up the remains of our elders. I know.
Well, right now, we have to take a quick break.
Okay.
We're going to come back to part 2. Thanks for joining us. Please make sure to find part 2. We'll give you some contact information and tons more information from the source. Thanks, Rochelle.
Thank you, Joyce.
Be right back. Okay.